He woke up every morning before the world noticed him, not because he was disciplined at first, but because pain didn't let him sleep anymore. And while others chased comfort, he quietly chose discomfort, understanding that no one was coming to rescue him, and that his life would only change the moment he decided to carry the weight himself, day after day, failure after failure, with no applause, no support, and no guarantees. Only a stubborn belief that if he stayed consistent long enough, the universe would have no choice but to respond. There were days when progress was invisible, when effort felt pointless, when quitting sounded logical, but he kept going because he realized something powerful. Success is not built in moments of motivation. It is built in moments of resistance, when your mind says stop and your standards say continue, and slowly, almost silently, his habits reshaped his identity. His confidence stopped depending on results. His fear stopped controlling his actions, and the same world that once ignored him began to notice the change. Not because he spoke louder, but because his presence became heavier. He didn't become unstoppable overnight. He became unstoppable the day he accepted that struggle was not a sign of failure, but proof of alignment. That loneliness was not punishment, but preparation, and that every disciplined choice was a vote for the future version of himself. And when he finally stood where he once dreamed of being, he understood the truth most people never learn. The real victory was never the outcome. It was the person he was forced to become to earn it. He lost people along the way, not because he changed for the worse, but because growth has a way of making excuses uncomfortable. And while others mistook his silence for weakness, they never saw the wars he fought alone at night, the discipline he chose when motivation disappeared, the standards he held when nobody was watching, because he understood that greatness is built in private long before it's recognized in public. There were moments when doubt whispered that he was moving too slow, that time was running out, that he started too late, but he learned to ignore the noise and trust the process, knowing that pressure refines those who refuse to break, and every setback became a lesson, every delay became conditioning, every scar became evidence that he stayed in the fight, and gradually his mindset hardened, his focus sharpened, and his tolerance for excuses vanished. He stopped chasing approval and started chasing progress, stopped reacting emotionally and started responding intentionally, realizing that control over the self is the highest form of power, and by the time results finally arrived, they no longer defined him, because the real transformation had already happened inside. He was no longer chasing success. He had become the kind of person success naturally follows. He no longer rushed the process, because he understood that anything built too fast collapses just as quickly. And while the world celebrated shortcuts, he committed to mastery, showing up on days when nothing seemed to change, trusting that repetition compounds even when results stay silent. And as time passed, his patience turned into precision, his discipline into identity, and his resilience into quiet confidence. He learned that life doesn't reward intention, it rewards execution, and that consistency, when paired with purpose, becomes unstoppable force. So he stopped negotiating with his comfort zone and started honoring the promises he made to himself, knowing that self-respect is built through follow-through. When storms came, he didn't ask why. He adjusted his stance, understanding that stability isn't the absence of chaos, but the ability to remain grounded within it. And by the time others noticed his rise, it was already inevitable, because long before the victory became visible, he had already won the internal war, the one that decides who lasts and who fades away. He reached a point where fear stopped being an enemy and became a signal, a reminder that he was stepping beyond who he used to be, and instead of avoiding it, he moved straight through it, understanding that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to obey it. And while others waited for certainty, he learned to act with conviction even in uncertainty, because momentum favors those who move first. Setbacks still came, but they no longer shook his foundation. They sharpened it, teaching him that control is not about dominating circumstances but mastering responses. And with every challenge, his mindset grew quieter, calmer, more dangerous, because he no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. He trusted his standards, protected his energy, and invested relentlessly in the unseen work, knowing that results are merely shadows of habits repeated long enough, and when opportunity finally knocked, it didn't feel like luck. It felt familiar, earned, almost overdue, because he had already prepared for it in silence. And standing there, grounded and unshaken, he understood a final truth. The world doesn't change for those who wish. It changes for those who become, and he had become someone who could not be ignored. He understood now that success was never about domination or noise, but about depth, about becoming so solid in who you are that chaos loses its power over you. And while others chased external wins, he focused on internal order, refining his routines, sharpening his focus, eliminating distractions that once drained him, because he realized that clarity is a competitive advantage few people ever earn. Time stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like an ally, because every day invested with intention quietly stacked in his favor. And even when outcomes were delayed, his standards never slipped, his effort never diluted, his direction never wavered, since he had learned that patience combined with execution is lethal. He no longer feared being misunderstood, because purpose doesn't require permission, and as his circle grew smaller, his vision grew sharper, his decisions cleaner, his movement more precise, until eventually progress became predictable. Not because life got easier, but because he got stronger. And in that strength, there was no arrogance, only certainty, the kind that comes from surviving yourself, from outworking doubt, from choosing growth when comfort was available. And in that quiet certainty, he found freedom, because the person he had become no longer needed motivation to move forward. Momentum carried him. Discs. He finally realized that the real battle was never against circumstances, people, money, background, or time, but against the invisible enemy that lived inside most humans: inconsistency, impatience, and the desire for comfort disguised as logic. And once he saw that clearly, his entire approach to life shifted, because he stopped asking what was easy, fast, or socially acceptable, and started asking what was required, what was necessary, what would still matter years from now when emotions faded and only outcomes remained. Mornings became intentional instead of reactive, nights became reflective instead of distracted, and slowly his life stopped being controlled by moods and started being shaped by standards, because he understood that standards create identity, and identity creates destiny. And while others kept negotiating with themselves, just today, just this once, I'll start tomorrow, he learned that every small decision was a vote either for the future he wanted or the life he was trying to escape, so he chose with precision, knowing that discipline is not punishment, but self-respect in action. There were still moments of exhaustion, moments where the weight felt heavy and the road felt endless, but he no longer interpreted fatigue as failure. He interpreted it as evidence of effort, and instead of stopping, he adjusted his pace without abandoning his direction, understanding that longevity beats intensity when intensity isn't sustainable. He watched people chase validation, applause, attention, and shortcuts, and he let them, because he had learned that focus is expensive, and only the serious are willing to pay its price. So he protected his energy, reduced unnecessary conversations, removed environments that weakened his resolve, and built a life structured around growth rather than escape. Fear still appeared, but it no longer controlled him because he stopped asking, "What if I fail?" and started asking, "What if I don't try?" Realizing that regret is heavier than risk and far more permanent, and with that mindset, he took calculated steps forward even when clarity was incomplete, trusting that movement creates answers that overthinking never will. Setbacks no longer felt personal, they felt instructional, each one revealing weaknesses to strengthen, skills to sharpen, patience to deepen, and resilience to reinforce. And instead of becoming bitter, he became better, Because he understood that bitterness keeps you stuck in the past, while growth pulls you forward. Over time, his confidence became quiet, grounded not in ego but in evidence, built from promises kept to himself when no one else was watching, and that confidence changed how he walked, how he spoke, how he decided, because certainty has weight and people can feel it without it being announced. Opportunities began to appear not because the world suddenly became fair, but because preparation finally met timing, and when those moments arrived, he didn't panic or hesitate because he had rehearsed discipline daily long before opportunity knocked, making success feel less like luck and more like alignment. He stopped romanticizing struggle but respected it, knowing that pain without purpose is suffering, but pain with direction is training, and through that lens, even the hardest days had meaning, because they were shaping the strength required.